What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer at BamaOnLine.com, joined as always by Jimmy Stein and Blake Byler. This is the Alabama football pregame show, and we're here to talk some Alabama, Oklahoma. It's exciting. Alabama's first trip to Norman, and maybe Blake's lifetime.
Just about.
Yeah,
Wait,
it's
no,
close.
no, I was born last time. I was born the
Okay.
year
He
of
was,
the
yeah.
last trip to Norman.
Blake was with us, so that's good to know. 2002. It's been a while though. It's gonna be my first time. I'm excited because I'll be able to cross off all 16 SEC football stadiums this Saturday, and that's makes me feel kind of old too at the same vein. So we've got a little mixture of everything, young and old, this week. But before we get into that trip to Norman, college football playoff rankings are out, and it's the third iteration. Alabama moves up in the rankings to number 7, and if you look at the bracket, they would be the number 9 seed and play a first round game at Notre Dame. And Jimmy, Blake and I were talking about it before we started recording. It's kind of a tough draw. Obviously, there's still plenty of football left, and this isn't what's going to be what we see here in a few weeks. But what was your initial reaction to seeing these third rankings and where Alabama is kind of positioned on the board?
Yeah, insofar as Alabama, what's unique, guys, is I think it's fair all along if you thought, gosh, if you're a top 8 seed, you're hosting. I mean, if you're in the top 8, you host, right? Because 5 through 8 hosts. But you can be confused by the difference between a ranking and the seeding, the way that tonight's hypothetical final scenario played out. 2 teams ranked behind Alabama are seeded ahead of Alabama, thus knocking Alabama down a couple spots, which is why they're 7th, but on the road. That doesn't seem particularly fair, and I think it's one of the, I don't know if glitch is the right word or a bug in the system, but I think it's something that they need to take a look at in the offseason about low-ranked conference champions being seeded ahead of teams that have accomplished more. I think that's one thing to look at, but that's kind of where Alabama was. In terms of playing on the road at Notre Dame, I think that would be a great matchup for college football. The world would just sit there and watch that in amazement on Notre Dame's campus with the Alabama quarterback and Riley Leonard at Notre Dame. That would be a big story. I think it would be fascinating, and I think it would be fair, and I would love to see that game if it happens. But as we know, guys, there's been a couple of weeks of this now, and each Tuesday there's a different landing spot for Alabama, a different opponent for Alabama. It's going to continue to change. I still think even with 2 weeks to go that there's still some losing left. I think there could still be some wrecks ahead of Alabama here, or even right behind Alabama, and there's still some opportunity for chaos.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I think in the first 3 weeks, these playoff projections have had Alabama going to Texas, Indiana, and now Notre Dame. So it changes every week. It's fascinating to kind of dissect it and just look at how it changes. And you're right. I mean, I think there's going to be plenty of changes coming. If you're Alabama, though, take care of business, hope for a Missouri win in the next 2 weeks, and then get to Atlanta and don't even have to worry about it. Just get a first round bye as an SEC champ. That's probably priority number 1. You got to have some things go your way a little bit, but the path is there. But before we kind of move on to the rest of the season, Blake, just did you have any reaction to the rankings or anything kind of rub you the wrong way when these came out?
I wouldn't say rubbed me the wrong way. I just had 2 kind of interesting thoughts. The first was I think we all were going into this curious about how they were going to rank the 2-loss SEC teams
Mhm.
and to see who stacked up where, because you have Alabama beat Georgia, Georgia beat Tennessee, Tennessee beat Alabama, Ole Miss beat Georgia. So you have this kind of jumbled mess. But it's clear that because all of these teams have beat each other, that head to head isn't number 1 necessarily, or at least head to head is more notable if it's more recent, is almost what it seems like with the Ole Miss and Georgia placement. But it's clear that the committee thinks of Alabama as a step above the rest of the 2-loss SEC teams, and I think a lot of that is because Alabama, the wins that they have. You look, they have the win over Georgia, the win over South Carolina, which we didn't think much of at the time, but now looks like a really strong win with how well South Carolina has been playing down the stretch. They're a very solid top 20 team, even though they have 3 losses, and they have another chance to beat Clemson here in a couple weeks. And then they still have Missouri ranked. They still have Missouri at that 23 spot, which is another kind of feather in Alabama's cap, another ranked win. So even though LSU lost, Alabama still has the most ranked wins of anybody in the top 25. But kind of with that, not only was Alabama the top-ranked two-loss SEC team, they jumped Miami, which I thought was very interesting, and I also thought was kind of a bit of course correction. Because a week ago, if you asked me, I thought Alabama should have been ahead of Miami last week when Miami lost to who was it, Georgia Tech that they lost to. Miami loses to Georgia Tech, so they're a one-loss ACC team. I thought strength of schedule-wise, based on quality wins, just go down the list of criteria, I thought a two-loss Alabama should have been over a one-loss Miami a week ago. Now you look at it, and Alabama does nothing but beat the brakes off of Mercer. Miami was on bye last week. So it doesn't make a ton of sense that this was the week that Alabama jumped Miami. But to me, it felt like course correction, something that should have been done a week ago that they recognized, and now they've done that flip. I think you could make equal arguments that Georgia, Ole Miss, or Tennessee, you could make arguments for a number of those teams to be over Miami as well. But because of that one loss, they're still sitting there at the number 8 spot in the rankings. I also think you could make an argument for Alabama over a one-loss Notre Dame because I think you could do the same thing with Georgia and Ole Miss over that team as well. I mean, their losses to Northern Illinois, which is a middle-of-the-road Mack team, like that, they easily have the worst loss of anybody in the top 10, probably top 15. And I don't know if they necessarily have the wins to or the strength of schedule, the ranked wins to be over a two-loss Alabama. I understand the argument there, and you might think, oh, that's only one spot. But like we were talking about earlier, that one spot is the difference between who hosts that first-round playoff game as far as the bracket is concerned right now. So if I'm Alabama, I would think Alabama has a shot to have the argument over Notre Dame, which would flip Tuscaloosa versus South Bend with this iteration of the bracket. But like I said, or like you said, there's a whole lot of football to be played, and this bracket is going to keep shifting. It doesn't do much to focus on what the individual matchups are right now, because this bracket's going to shift a whole lot by the time we get around to December, early December, when the actual bracket's released.
Notre Dame and Tuscaloosa would be pretty sweet first round matchup, no doubt. And Notre Dame's got to play Army this weekend, so a tough one. Before we move on, though, I think if you're Tennessee, you probably have to be kind of scratching your head a little bit. It makes sense, but to be 11th, so 4 spots behind Alabama, the team that you beat, you have to be kind of mad about that if you're the Vols. But that's 5 SEC teams in the top 11. Jimmy, what did you think of the way they kind of broke down those 2-loss SEC teams? Because we know Texas was going to be up near the top, but Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, do you feel like that's fair?
I did think it's fair. Of course, easy for me to say with Alabama at the top of that list, but I did think it was fair, and I thought it was semi-logical. Now, I think what you said about Tennessee is correct. Tennessee out of the field right now is a little bizarre to me and should not be the case. And I couldn't agree more with what Blake said. Alabama should be ahead of Notre Dame. They're way ahead in strength of schedule. Alabama's best win is better than Notre Dame's best win. Alabama's second best win is miles better than Notre Dame's second best win. And Notre Dame has a worse loss. I guess they're saying eye test in terms of why Notre Dame's ahead. And I guess I can understand someone having a subjective opinion like that, but Alabama would be favored to beat Notre Dame on a neutral field. I really believe that's true. So if it's eye test, then why would Alabama be favored? And I believe that they would. I could be wrong about that, but I think some of these SEC teams should be ranked a little higher. I'd also say Texas A&M probably does deserve to be the lowest, but I also myself wouldn't put them behind BYU and SMU for the same reason. I think Texas A&M be favored to beat those teams on a neutral field. There's only one loss difference between BYU and SMU, who don't have SEC quality wins like A&M. So I think A&M is a little low too.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, 8 teams in the 8 SEC teams, I should say, in the top 25. LSU falling out after another loss, but it'll be interesting. It's going to be interesting the last couple of weeks, plus the conference championship game. A lot of football left to be played and a lot to still figure out. But one thing's for sure is Alabama handled business on Saturday against Mercer. We're going to kind of put a bow on that game. Saw a ton of players. I think Alabama's participation chart had it at 90 plus. We saw a lot of walk-ons, and we saw the first teamers handle business, do what they needed to do. I wanted to kind of turn it over to you guys, though. Starting with you, Blake. Just was there a young guy maybe that caught your attention the most that impressed you in their maybe limited snaps, or maybe they got an extended look against Mercer? Was there a young guy that impressed you maybe more than others?
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about this on the Big Show earlier this week, but Austin Mack, I thought he had probably the play of the game as far as the younger guys. Like once the starters left, with that 31-yard touchdown pass he threw to Rico Scott. I didn't get to see it live really because you and I were on the way down to the field by the time Austin Mack had taken over the offense, and it was pretty late in the fourth quarter. And you look up on the screen and you see everybody cheering, and Austin Mack's thrown a touchdown to Rico Scott. So I didn't really get to see the play until I looked back. But my goodness, that was a well placed ball. Like that was a beautiful pass. Maybe one of the better placed touchdown passes we've seen from an Alabama quarterback this season. And I know it's against Mercer, and I know it's in garbage time, but to see that out of the guy who was your fourth quarterback to come off the bench, like your fourth quarterback in the pecking order, I think that just speaks to the talent that this quarterback room has and the amount of capable guys that they have. Obviously, this is Jalen Milroe's team, but you look to the future and you've got guys who it's going to be a tough competition to see who takes over for this team going forward, not to mention a top 5 recruit in Keelan Russell coming in the future. So I think seeing that play was impressive, just the way that he put it on the outside shoulder near the sideline, like in the corner of the end zone. But that's just exciting to be thinking about a quarterback who you can see why Kalen DeBoer wanted him. You can see why Kalen DeBoer brought him in at Washington and then brought him from Washington to Alabama because he believes in him. And he's got, a pro style build. He's like 6'5", 6'6". An intriguing prospect for sure. And that play caught my eye.
Yeah, 5 quarterbacks getting in the game. I thought the scholarship guys all did some good things. Jimmy, what about you? Was there a young guy that caught your attention maybe more than most?
Yeah, obviously the Austin Mack to Rico Scott play, I think everyone's going to talk about that first, and they're both going to be good players down the road. I mean, I think that wasn't the first time that we've seen or heard Rico Scott, has a chance to be a thing as he moves forward with his career. But one guy that always stands out to me, and he did so again, it was just one snap and one play that he flashed, but Justin Okoronkwo at inside linebacker, every time I see him, whether it's on special teams, whether he gets in at garbage time, he impresses the heck out of me, especially from a size speed standpoint. He doesn't look lost. I know a lot of people assumed a player coming from Germany that didn't play normal American high school football in the States would have a huge learning curve. That hasn't appeared to be the case to us at all. And he once again filled a gap and made a big hit on Mercer's last possession. And it made me think once again, wow, in the spring, assuming Jahad Campbell and Deontay Lawson moved on to the NFL, I think Okoronkwo is going to make a serious run at the ones and to be a starter even in his year 2. He impresses me every time out.
Yeah, both he and Caden Jones, when they've been healthy, they've been out there on special teams. I think that's always the telltale signs. Those true freshmen, they're not wasting a redshirt year on them. They're getting them out there to play, and when those guys have gotten opportunities, they certainly have taken advantage of it. And you're right. I mean, Alabama could be losing all 3 of its kind of first team linebackers because Justin Jefferson's a senior, and the other 2 have NFL draft decisions here coming up. But I'm sticking with the defensive side of the ball, and this one, limited snaps. But I think the Wolf linebacker position is so fascinating because you have Q Robinson, who's out for the season, which, again, I can't say enough, sucks so much because Q's such a good dude and he's having such a good season. And then now we know that Keanu Coote, who was initially suspended, is going to be entering the transfer portal. It was an opportunity to get some of those young guys in the game. And I thought Ja'Shawn Ross late, we were able to see him kind of get some pressure in the backfield. Again, it's very limited snaps. I don't think he played more than 5. I'd have to go back and look at the PFF snap counts because there's so many of them. I didn't memorize all, what felt like 150. But he's a guy that flashes in an instant. And that's the first time we've seen him. He battled an injury early in the season, and he got on the field at that Wolf linebacker position before Noah Carter, which is a little surprising to me. And so I think both of those guys, what's nice is, because of the redshirt rule, they can play in these last 2 games and play in the postseason if needed and still maintain a redshirt year because they've only played in, I think, Carter's played in 2 games. Ja'Shawn Ross has played in 1. They can continue to play and still redshirt. And I think that's huge for the depth of this position because you've got 2 redshirt freshmen at the top, 2 true freshmen now, and then we'll see what happens with signing day. But Justin Hill coming in from Ohio, so I think the depth at that position is going to be key moving forward. And I think seeing some good things from Ja'Shawn Ross, that's always good in a game like Mercer. But Oklahoma coming up. It's going to be a big one for Alabama. I think this one, it maybe isn't as exciting as before, just given Oklahoma's record. They're sitting at 5-5, looking to get bowl eligible here at the end of the season. It might not be the first year in the SEC that Brent Venables wanted, but I want to talk about some key matchups in this game with you guys. And Blake, I'll start with you. What's something when you look at how Alabama matches up with Oklahoma that has your attention?
I'm interested to see Alabama's passing game kind of against Oklahoma's secondary. Oklahoma has a good defense. They have one of the better defenses in the SEC, I would say. And you can kind of see that just based on looking at their box scores, like just looking at the scores that they've allowed against some of these teams. Like when they lose, they're not giving up 40. Like they lose because their offense has been fairly inept at times, and they've lost by only giving up 25, 26 points. But their rushing defense ranks top 20 nationally. And we know Alabama over the last couple of weeks has done a great job kind of shifting towards a run-focused, a run-centric offense. But they're going up against a tough run defense. And I think while Alabama has had success, and I think they can have success in the run game, there's going to be a drive or two where Alabama ends up in 3rd and long because Oklahoma is talented up front and they have a good front 7, and they're going to force Alabama into some tough passing situations. So from there, I want to see how Jalen Milroe can respond and how he can push the ball, if he can push the ball downfield against or in a tough road environment, because he didn't really have to do that against LSU. Like Alabama just dominated on the ground from the start and didn't really have to test anything over the top. And that's an area of Milroe's game and Alabama's offense that we haven't seen much of lately. That it wasn't needed against Mercer, unless you count the 45-yard Robbie Utes touchdown over the top. But that they were never going to really be tested in that way. So again, in a tough road environment, like this is a prideful program. Like this program, they're not just going to lay down. These fans are going to show up. It's a night game. It's Alabama against Oklahoma. It's 2 blue blood programs. Like this is going to be a raucous environment that is going to be tough. And when Alabama gets in those tough 3rd and long situations where they've struggled at times this year, I want to see how they execute. And I think that's going to be pretty important to not only the outcome, but if Alabama can have the kind of statement game that I feel like they can, they're going to need to execute in those situations.
Jimmy, what about you?
Yeah, what I think super interesting here, this is one of the few times this year Alabama's played a team who defensively their best player is their Mike linebacker, middle linebacker, Danny Stutzman. He's outstanding. He's one of the best players in the SEC. Teams that have defended Alabama often utilize a spy. It's usually the Mike. Doesn't have to be. It can be any number of guys. It could even be a safety. But most teams use the Mike as kind of a spy on the quarterback. And wow, what a matchup that is. I mean, Jalen Milroe, one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the country, if not the best, against Danny Stutzman, who's one of the best Mike linebacker players, in the country. I love that matchup. Similar one against LSU with Whit Weeks when it was Milroe versus Whit Weeks. And I thought Milroe rushed for 185 yards. And several times in the game, Weeks was spying Milroe. And it didn't matter because Milroe just ran around him and ran past him because it's a tough assignment. But that's kind of what I'm looking at, that real interesting chess match between the Sooner star linebacker, Danny Stutzman, and, of course, Jalen Milroe, Alabama's Heisman candidate.
I like that. I think I'm going to go the other side of the ball. I think that Alabama's pass rush against this Oklahoma offensive line is really fascinating because you look at Alabama, they don't have a ton of sacks. You got 21 on the season. I think that's tied for 13th in the SEC. Last week against a Mercer team, when you have an SEC opponent against an FCS opponent, Alabama only had 1 sack, and it came from a guy that's been playing with his hair on fire of late, Jahad Campbell. But they're going against an offensive line that's really bad in terms of allowing sacks. Oklahoma's given up 41 this season. That's a lot. Alabama gave up 49 last year in 14 games, but Oklahoma's been giving up a lot. And that goes back to kind of what Blake was talking about with how their offense has been a little inept at times. They haven't been able to protect whoever's back there at quarterback. And I know Alabama's kind of preparing for a couple of different signal callers. And I just think if they can get pressure on whoever's back there, that'll be important. Kane Womack's not a guy that's going to just send the house. He gets a little exotic with some things that he does. And I think continuing to use Jahad Campbell off the edge will be interesting. But I just think with this Wolf linebacker position, with how it's been impacted by departures and injuries, can some of these young guys, pin their ears back and get after the quarterback against an offensive line that's been kind of an open door for opposing defenses this season? That to me, if they're able to do that, can end drives quickly, can force some turnovers, and this defense has been very opportunistic when it comes to that. I think Alabama has a good shot. And that's going to kind of lead us into the last point. Well, I guess no, it's not. But it does factor into the over-under, because Alabama here of late has been so turnover heavy on defense. It's been impressive, honestly. They're up to third nationally with 24. And I was going to pose it to you guys with an over-under at just turnovers in this game. I'm going to set it at 3, but that's kind of been Alabama's average here of late. I think they've had 3 turnovers in 6 of their last 7 games. It's been kind of crazy how they've swarmed to the football, not just from an interception standpoint. They're getting the ball out via fumbles. So setting the over-under at 3, Blake, where do you feel like Alabama comes in at that from a turnover standpoint?
I'm going to go under, but not because I don't think they're going to force any. I think it's going to be more like 1 or 2. This streak that they're on is pretty incredible. I mean, 3 or more turnovers in 5 consecutive games is pretty unheard of. Even Alabama's, some of their best defenses in the Saban era that were great at forcing turnovers and the ones that were scoring touchdowns, I don't think they were forcing turnovers at this rate over this long stretch of games. But actually, it's interesting. Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins, their 2 quarterbacks, have a combined 5 interceptions this year. Like, they haven't been just handing the ball away as far as throwing the ball downfield. I don't know what their fumble numbers are. I think that, the way that they've been forcing turnovers has been incredible. I think it has to come to an end eventually. Like, that this streak can't go on forever, you would think. So I'm going to say under, but 2 weeks ago, I said under on Jalen Milrow's rushing yards, and then he just about broke the over in the first half. So I think he broke the over-under in the first quarter, possibly. Yep. So I'm going to go under, and I'm going to say that, and then they're going to have 4 picks or something on Saturday. But I'll go under for now.
The fumble numbers are 13. They've lost 18 total turnovers. They're -1 turnover margin. For comparison, Alabama's +13. So that's where that matchup stands. What about you, Jimmy? Do you go over or under with 3?
Yeah, I'll go under for the exact same reason Blake has. Just like, how can this incredible streak continue? It's just one of those things, like, it can't go on. I mean, it's a defying logic, and Oklahoma's not particularly terrible in terms of throwing picks anyway. And so I'll go under, but should we be surprised if it's 3? If it's 4, should we be surprised? No. But I'll just go under, just because it's just a streak that's kind of hard to imagine.
Give me the over. I went over with the Jalen rushing yards at LSU. I'll go over here. And, you make a good point about how they don't turn it over from an interception standpoint, but with that pass rush against an offensive line that is just giving up so many sacks, it can happen if you're forcing things on the road, if you fall behind. So I think I could have probably done a push there. 3 I would feel pretty comfortable with 3, but I think this team is looking to continue to make statements. I think they feel pretty good about their position, just in terms of where they are in the playoff hunt. But to go on the road to Oklahoma and to make a statement, especially defensively, I think they can do that. And this, I'm actually right now, this leads us to our last point. It's Alabama wins the game and that's, I'm going to kind of piggyback and start with this because it carries over for me. I think if this defense continues on the trend that it's been on since the Vanderbilt game, they win the game. I think that, in a combination, the offensive line both trending up. I think if Alabama can continue on those trajectories, they win this football game, because you look at the last 2 weeks, this offensive line hasn't allowed a sack. Now, there's been some pressures. There's been some things. Nick Sheridan, I asked him about it on Monday, and he talked about how it hasn't been perfect. But you just look at the numbers in terms of what Jalen Milroe is facing from a sack and a pressure standpoint. They've been down. And I think defensively, I think they've given up 20 points last 3 games. That'll play. But they need to be able to continue to do that on the road. I think being able to do it against LSU at Tiger Stadium gives this team confidence it needs to go on the road and do it in Oklahoma. So if this defense continues to be opportunistic with the turnovers, if this offensive line continues to give Jalen Milroe time back there, I think Alabama can win this one by a couple scores. What about you, Blake? Alabama wins the game if
they win the turnover margin. Like, I don't even think they need 3 or 4. I think if they're +1 in turnover margin, they win the game, because kind of like we said, Oklahoma's offense has been not good this entire season. They can't afford to lose possessions. Like, they can't afford to give away possessions, especially if any of those turnovers come on a drive where they've actually moved into Alabama territory. So if Alabama is able to force a turnover or 2, every possession that Oklahoma loses is very valuable in this game, because they're only going to have so many opportunities to score with the way that their offense has played this season, on top of how well the Alabama defense has played. So if the offense takes care of the ball, if they don't hand them favorable field position, if Alabama wins the turnover margin, they win the game.
What about you, Jimmy? Alabama wins a game if?
Yeah, if they outrush Oklahoma, I think it's just simply a matter of outrushing them, because it's hard to imagine guys with Oklahoma's struggles at quarterback talked to an Oklahoma media industry guy today, and he says that this will be the 10th different offensive lineup that they've used on the offensive line, the 10th different iteration of the starting offensive line because of injuries. And we know what their injuries have been at wide receiver for a lot of the year, down 5 guys. There's still down guys at receiver. It's still a makeshift offensive line. Oklahoma's only chance to score and move the ball is rushing. And if Alabama outrushes Oklahoma, I don't know what Oklahoma has left to hang their hat on. So I just think simply Alabama outrushing Oklahoma and making this game. Alabama doesn't have to win this 49-0, although that would be nice and fun. I think if Alabama just shows up to Norman and runs the ball and runs it effectively and doesn't allow Oklahoma to run the ball, then Alabama's coming back with a win.
Yeah, I don't know if it needs to be LSU but if it's similar, I think you're spot on, Jimmy. Well, that'll about do it for us this week. Thanks for listening to the Alabama football pregame show. If you've made it this far, be sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening via podcast, give us 5 stars. And Jimmy, we'll see you on the postgame. Well, we won't. We'll be in Norman, I guess. But good luck on the postgame show. And we'll see everybody on the big show on Tuesday. And the 3 of us will be back next Thursday for the Iron Bowl. So until then, see everybody.